Gentlemen, this is the moment we've been preparing for. Let's review the key points and make our decision.
The pen gleamed like a weapon in Arthur Penhaligon's hand. Across the polished glass table in his penthouse office, his fingers trembled slightly. Not from age, but from exhaustion. From grief. The ink hovered above the signature line like his life was holding its breath, waiting to see if he'd really do it. His suit was immaculate, custom-tailored, but his face told a different story. Dark circles beneath his eyes. Jaw clenched so tight it ached. Around him, lawyers sat perfectly still, their silence heavy and expectant, like mourners at a funeral watching a coffin being lowered into the ground. Then, barely above a whisper, someone spoke. "Sir, please, don't sign that." A cleaning woman stood frozen near the doorway, still clutching her spray bottle. Her uniform was threadbare. Her shoes were worn through at the heels. But her eyes, wide, terrified, certain, were locked on the document like she'd just witnessed a crime about to happen. Simon Vane's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Security. Remove her. Now." But Arthur didn't move. He stared at her, half irritated, half curious, because for the first time in 3 weeks, someone in this room didn't sound rehearsed. Someone sounded real. The woman stepped forward, her voice shaking but growing stronger. "Page 42, she said urgently. "There's a mistake. A deliberate one." Arthur's hand froze completely above the signature line. And in that suspended moment, everyone in the room realized that this wasn't a celebration. This was something else entirely. And this woman, this invisible, overlooked cleaning woman, had just seen what no one else had noticed. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I love seeing how far this channel reaches. And if you enjoy powerful emotional stories with real-life lessons, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this remind us that heroes don't always wear expensive suits. Sometimes they wear cleaning uniforms. Arthur Penhaligon had built an empire on attention to detail. For 15 years, every line of code, every partnership agreement, every hiring decision had passed through his hands. Penhaligon Technologies didn't become a $3 billion company by accident. It happened because Arthur refused to miss anything. But grief, he was learning, had a way of blinding even the sharpest eyes. 3 weeks earlier, he'd stood in a cemetery under gray skies, watching his mother's casket being lowered into the ground. Eleanor Penhaligon, 68 years old. A woman who'd spent her life in industrial kitchens, feeding people who never learned her name. She'd raised Arthur alone after his father left, working doubles and weekends so he could afford textbooks and a laptop that barely functioned. He could still feel her hands squeezing his in that hospital room, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "Remember, baby," she'd whispered, her voice hoarse from the ventilator they'd removed an hour earlier. "Titles don't make people honest. Listen to what people do, not what they say." He'd nodded, throat too tight to speak, and then she'd smiled at him one last time before her eyes closed for good. At the funeral, Simon Vane had delivered the eulogy. Arthur's CFO, his college roommate, the man who'd been there since the beginning, who'd believed in the idea when it was just sketches on a whiteboard in a cramped apartment. Simon had spoken beautifully about Eleanor's strength, her sacrifices, her quiet dignity. People had cried. Arthur had barely heard any of it. Since then, the days had blurred together. Sleep came in fragments. Food tasted like cardboard. The penthouse office that usually energized him, all that glass, all that light, all that proof of what he'd accomplished, now felt like a fishbowl. Exposed. Suffocating. Simon had stepped in immediately. "You just focus on healing, Arthur. I've got this." And Arthur, too exhausted to argue, had let him. Meetings were rescheduled. Financials were handled. Legal matters were addressed. Simon became the shield between Arthur and a world that kept demanding decisions Arthur didn't have the strength to make. Now, sitting at the glass conference table with the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the windows, Arthur stared at the document in front of him. Strategic Partnership Agreement with Titan Holdings. 47 pages. Dense legal language that swam before his eyes every time he tried to focus. "This is the right move," Simon said gently, leaning forward with that expression of concern Arthur had seen so often lately. "Your mother would want you protected. This merger secures everything you've built. It honors her legacy." Arthur's jaw tightened. His mother's legacy. Eleanor, who'd scrubbed floors so he could dream bigger. Who'd never owned anything expensive in her life but had somehow raised a son worth billions. What would she think of this? "I trust you," Arthur said finally, the words tasting hollow. Because what choice did he have? Simon had been loyal for 15 years. Simon had cried at the funeral. Simon was family in every way that mattered. The lawyers nodded approvingly. One of them slid a pen across the table. Expensive. Heavy. The kind of pen that sealed deals worth hundreds of millions. Arthur picked it up. His hand felt numb. Everything felt numb. The office door opened quietly. A woman in a faded gray uniform entered, pushing a cleaning cart. She moved like a ghost, careful not to make noise, eyes down. The kind of person Arthur had trained himself not to see years ago. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. You couldn't notice everyone when you were building something this big. She worked her way around the room's perimeter, wiping surfaces that probably didn't need wiping. The lawyers ignored her completely. Simon glanced at her once, annoyed, then turned his attention back to Arthur. "Whenever you're ready," Simon said softly. Arthur positioned the pen above the signature line. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "Listen to what people do, not what they say." But Simon had done everything right. Hadn't he? The cleaning woman moved closer to the table, spraying the glass edge, wiping it down with mechanical efficiency. She was perhaps 30, thin in a way that spoke of missed meals rather than exercise. Her hands moved quickly, professionally. Then she stopped. Arthur didn't notice at first. He was staring at the signature line, trying to make his hand move, trying to push through the fog in his mind. But the woman's breathing had changed. She stood frozen, cloth in one hand, her eyes locked on the document spread before him. Not the first page where his signature was needed. Something deeper. Page 42. Her face had gone pale. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Simon noticed. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone sharp. The woman's eyes darted up, startled. "No, sir. Sorry." But she didn't move. She stood there, trembling slightly, staring at the document like it was a loaded gun. And for the first time in 3 weeks, something cut through the numbness in Arthur's chest. A flicker of something. Doubt. Curiosity. Fear. Because his mother had always said the quietest people often see the most. And this woman, this invisible, overlooked cleaning woman, looked absolutely terrified of what she'd just seen. Hope Miller's heart slammed against her ribs as her eyes locked on page 42. The words seemed to glow on the page, burning themselves into her vision the way they always did. Photographic memory, her old professor had called it. A gift. Right now it felt like a curse. Succession of liability clause. Section 14.3b. The phrasing was wrong. Deliberately wrong. She'd seen this exact structure before, memorized it during corporate law 2 at NYU. This wasn't a merger agreement. This was a trap. Her hands trembled as she gripped the spray bottle tighter. She should leave. Walk away. This wasn't her business. She was just the cleaning woman. Nobody even knew her name. But her mind was already racing back, pulling up the case law, the precedents, the lectures she'd absorbed like oxygen 5 years ago when she'd been someone different. Someone with a future. 5 years ago, Hope Miller had sat in the front row of Professor Garrett's corporate law class at NYU. Her laptop open, fingers flying across the keys as she transcribed every word. Top 5% of her class. Full scholarship. The kind of student professors remembered, the kind they wrote recommendation letters for. You see patterns others miss, Hope, Professor Garrett had told her after she'd identified a fatal flaw in a sample contract the rest of the class had approved. That's a gift. Don't waste it. She hadn't planned to. Then the call came. Her brother Marcus, 13 years old, diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Her sister Lily, 12, terrified and alone. Their parents had died 3 years earlier in a car accident, and Hope, 23 and barely an adult herself, was their legal guardian. The only family they had left. The medical bills arrived like an avalanche. Insurance covered some of it. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Hope took a semester off to manage Marcus's treatment schedule, to make sure Lily got to school, to hold everything together. 1 semester became 2. The scholarship required full-time enrollment. It was revoked. She told herself she'd go back. She just needed to get Marcus stable first. Just needed to find her footing. She never went back. Now, 5 years later, Hope worked for Crystal Clean Agency. Corporate offices. Hotel conference rooms. Event spaces. Anywhere people with money made messes they expected someone invisible to clean up. She worked night shifts mostly, because they paid an extra $2 an hour. Every penny went to the foster family in Queens who'd agreed to take Marcus and Lily temporarily, who let Hope visit twice a month if she stayed current on the monthly support payments. Home was Mercy House Shelter on the Lower East Side. A bunk bed in a room with 15 other women. 1 small drawer for her possessions. Lights out at 10 p.m. No exceptions. But she'd kept one thing from her old life. Photocopied pages from law journals and textbooks, smuggled out of the library before she'd lost her student access. She read them by flashlight after lights out, whispering case names to herself like prayers. Hadley versus Baxendale. Pennzoil versus Texaco. Miller versus United States. She couldn't let go. Couldn't stop being the person she'd almost become. Over the years, cleaning corporate offices, she'd seen thousands of documents left carelessly on conference tables and desks. Her mind cataloged them automatically. Contract structures. Liability clauses. Financial projections. She'd spotted errors before. Typos in merger agreements, miscalculated spreadsheets, and signed amendments that would never hold up in court. She never said anything. It wasn't her place. She was just the help. The invisible woman with the spray bottle. But this was different. She stared at the document, at the billionaire's hand hovering above the signature line, at the lawyer's patient smile. If this man signed, he'd be immediately liable for debts he didn't owe. The succession clause would trigger automatic bankruptcy under Section 1129. Everything he'd built would be liquidated. And the appendix, she could see it from here, the list of operational debts that looked legitimate but weren't. This was embezzlement disguised as corporate restructuring. Her throat tightened. If she spoke up, they'd fire her. Crystal Clean would drop her immediately for disrupting a client meeting. No reference. No final paycheck. And without this job, she couldn't make next month's payment to Marcus and Lily's foster family. Couldn't see them. Couldn't keep the only promise that mattered. But if she stayed silent, this man would lose everything. Just like her family had. Just like everyone who trusted the wrong people. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. clear as if she were standing right there. The last thing she'd said before the accident, dropping Hope off at her dorm. "Hope, baby, your name isn't just pretty. It's a responsibility. When you see someone drowning, you don't ask if you're qualified to swim. You jump." Hope's hands were shaking so badly the spray bottle rattled. The lawyer, the one with the cold smile, was staring at her now. "Is there a problem?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Her future balanced on a knife's edge. She'd lost her place in law school, lost her scholarship, lost her dreams. But she hadn't lost her eyes. And she couldn't unsee what she saw. The billionaire was looking at her now too. Exhausted, grief-stricken, about to sign his life away to people he trusted. Hope took one shaking breath, then another, and then quietly, terrified, she spoke. "Sir, please, don't sign that." The room seemed to hold its breath. Arthur's pen remained frozen above the signature line. His eyes locked on the cleaning woman who'd just spoken. She looked terrified, like she'd surprised even herself. "Page 42, Hope said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The succession of liability clause. It's deliberately flawed." Simon Vane's expression shifted so quickly Arthur almost missed it. A flash of something cold and sharp before the mask of concern slid back into place. "This is absurd," Simon said, standing abruptly. His voice was controlled, but there was an edge to it Arthur had never heard before. "Security. We need this woman removed immediately." But Arthur raised his hand. The grief that had been clouding his mind for weeks suddenly felt like it was lifting, replaced by something sharper. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "Listen to what people do, not what they say." "Wait," Arthur said quietly. "Let her speak." Simon turned to him, eyes wide. "Arthur, she's just—" "I said wait." Arthur looked at the woman. Her spray bottle was shaking in her grip, but her eyes, dark and fierce, were locked on the document with absolute certainty. "What did you see?" Hope swallowed hard. When she spoke again, her voice was still trembling, but the words came out precise, practiced. "The way this clause is structured, the moment you sign, two things happen simultaneously. First, you become immediately liable for all debts listed in Appendix D. Second, those debts trigger automatic personal bankruptcy under Section 1129 of the Bankruptcy Code." One of the lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Simon's jaw tightened. Hope continued, gaining momentum. "But here's the trap. The appendix lists debts that aren't yours. They're structured to look like operational expenses, but they're actually embezzled funds. Signing this doesn't just make you bankrupt, it makes you legally responsible for crimes you didn't commit." The silence that followed was deafening. Simon laughed, but it sounded hollow. "This is insane. Arthur, she's a cleaning woman. How would she even understand corporate law?" Hope met his gaze. Her hands had stopped shaking. "I was 2 semesters away from a law degree at NYU, she said quietly. "Corporate fraud was my specialty." Simon's face darkened. "That's Bankruptcy Code Section 1129, subsection A, paragraph 11, Hope recited, her voice steady now. "Fraudulent conveyance under the Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act." The precedent was set in Miller v. United States, where liability succession clauses were used to transfer criminal exposure. This document follows that exact structure. Arthur's lawyer, a gray-haired man named Richardson who'd been silent this entire time, suddenly grabbed the document. His hands fumbled as he flipped to page 42, then frantically searched for Appendix D. His face went pale. "Oh my God," Richardson whispered. "She's right." Arthur stood slowly. "What?" Richardson's finger traced down the appendix, his hand shaking. "These debts, $47 million in operational expenses. But these vendor names, I don't recognize any of them. These look like shell companies. That's ridiculous, Simon said, but his voice had lost its authority. Those are legitimate. Show me the invoices, Arthur said coldly. Simon's mouth opened. Closed. They're in the financial records. I can pull them up. Now, Arthur said. Richardson held page 42 up to the light from the window. For a moment nothing happened. Then Arthur saw it, a faint watermark barely visible, embedded in the paper itself. Titan Holdings Legal Division. Richardson read aloud. Confidential draft. The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. Titan Holdings. The company they were supposedly merging with. This wasn't a partnership agreement at all. This was never a merger, Arthur said slowly, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. Titan was going to acquire my company after I declared bankruptcy. Pennies on the dollar. And these debts, he gestured to Appendix D, would make it look like I'd been embezzling. I'd go to prison while they bought everything I built for nothing. Simon took a step backward. Arthur, listen to me. How long? Arthur's voice was quiet. Dangerous. How long have you been planning this? I haven't. This is a misunderstanding. How long? Simon's mask finally cracked completely. The concern, the friendship, the grief, all of it vanished, replaced by something bitter and cold. You have no idea how much I've given to this company, he said. 15 years, Arthur. 15 years of watching you take all the credit while I did the actual work. Your name on the building. Your face in the magazines. I deserved more than a salary. Arthur felt like he'd been punched. So you decided to frame me for embezzlement and steal everything? I decided to take what I earned, Simon snapped. Then he seemed to realize what he'd just admitted. He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. Security, Arthur said, his voice like ice. Seal the building. No one leaves. Simon froze. And call the police, Arthur continued. He looked at the cleaning woman. This stranger who'd just saved him from complete destruction. This woman just exposed a criminal conspiracy. I want every word she said documented. Hope stood there, spray bottle still in hand, looking like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Arthur couldn't believe it either. His best friend, the man who'd delivered his mother's eulogy, had tried to destroy him. Would have succeeded, too, if a woman everyone ignored hadn't been paying attention. The police arrived within 20 minutes. 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit, their faces professionally neutral as they surveyed the penthouse office. Hope sat in a conference room chair, hands clasped in her lap, while they asked the same questions over and over. Walk us through it again. How did you know what to look for? You're a cleaning woman, correct? You dropped out of law school 5 years ago? You're currently homeless. The way they said it, homeless, made it sound like a moral failing, like something that disqualified her from being believed. Why should we trust your interpretation of a legal document? The older detective asked, not unkindly, but with obvious skepticism. Hope opened her mouth to answer, but Arthur's voice cut through from the doorway. Because she saved my company from a $47 million fraud scheme, he said coldly. And because every single thing she said was verified by my corporate attorney. Is that enough? The detective's expression shifted. Mr. Penhaligon, we're just. She's the witness who exposed this. Treat her like one. Arthur stepped into the room. And she's getting legal representation. The best I can afford. Hope stared at him. Mr. Penhaligon, I don't need. Yes, you do, Arthur said quietly. Trust me. The questioning lasted 4 more hours. By the time Hope left the building, it was nearly midnight. Her supervisor at Crystal Clean had already called, furious that she'd disrupted a client meeting and overstepped her position. She was fired, effective immediately. Hope stood on the sidewalk, still holding the garbage bag with her spare uniform, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. No job meant no income. No income meant no payment to Marcus and Lily's foster family next month. No payment meant no visitation rights. She'd lost everything by opening her mouth. The media found her 2 days later. Billionaire's homeless advisor, scam or savior? The headline screamed across the New York Post. The article was vicious, quoting anonymous sources close to the situation, suggesting Hope was manipulating a grief-stricken Arthur Penhaligon, that she'd fabricated the fraud to insert herself into his life, that a convenient legal crisis had made her indispensable to a vulnerable billionaire. Simon's doing. It had to be. Hope returned to Mercy House shelter that evening to find news vans parked outside, reporters shouting questions at anyone who entered. The other residents avoided her eyes. The shelter director, a kind woman named Ruth who'd always treated Hope with dignity, pulled her aside. "Hope, you're not in trouble," Ruth said gently. "But this attention, it's disruptive. For everyone. Maybe you should find somewhere else for a while. Just until this dies down." Hope stood there, her few possessions in a backpack, and felt the door close on the last stable thing in her life. She spent that night on a bench in Riverside Park, her phone clutched in her hand, checking it obsessively for messages from Marcus and Lily's foster mother. When the text finally came, her blood went cold. It was a photo. Marcus outside his school, backpack slung over one shoulder, completely unaware he was being photographed. The message was blank. It didn't need words. The second photo arrived an hour later. Lily at the park, pushing herself on a swing. The meaning was crystal clear. Back off or they pay. Hope doubled over, pressing her forehead to her knees, trying to breathe through the panic. She had nothing, no job, no home, no safety. But her siblings were everything. And now they were being threatened because she'd told the truth. "I can't do this," she whispered to no one. "I can't." "Yes, you can." Hope's head snapped up. Arthur Penhaligon stood a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, looking exhausted but determined. "How did you?" "I've had security keeping an eye on you," Arthur said. "After what you did for me, I wasn't going to leave you unprotected." He gestured to the bench. "May I?" Hope nodded, too tired to argue. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Arthur said quietly, "I have guest properties. Secure. Private. You'd be safe there." "I can't," Hope said immediately. "If I take your help, they'll say I was bought. That I made this whole thing up for money." "They're already saying that." "Then I can't give them proof." Hope's voice cracked. "I have nothing, Mr. Penhaligon. Nothing except my word. If I lose that I'm—" She stopped, blinking back tears. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "My mother was a cook. Worked 3 jobs to put me through state college. She died exhausted, her hands still cracked from dish soap, still cooking for wealthy people who never learned her name." Hope looked at him. "You remind me of her," Arthur continued. "Not because you're poor, but because you refuse to look away from truth, even when it costs you everything." He met her eyes. "She would have done exactly what you did. Spoken up, even knowing what it would cost. And I let her down by not listening to what she taught me." Hope's throat tightened. "I lost my invisibility the moment I spoke," she whispered. "That was my armor. Now I'm a target." "Then let me be your shield," Arthur said simply. Hope wanted to say no. Wanted to stay invisible, safe, untouchable. But she thought of Marcus and Lily, of those photos, of the message they carried. "They threatened my siblings," she said quietly. Arthur's expression hardened. "Then we protect them too." For the first time in days, Hope felt something other than fear. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was close. The forensic accountants worked through the night, their findings growing darker with each passing hour. Arthur sat in his office as the sun rose, listening to numbers that felt like body blows. 7 years, the lead accountant said, sliding another report across the desk. The embezzlement goes back 7 years. $47 million moved through a network of shell companies, all with legitimate-sounding names. Apex Solutions, Sterling Logistics Consulting, Global Systems Integration. "None of them real," Arthur said flatly. "None of them real," the accountant confirmed. The money was funneled out through fake vendor contracts, inflated consulting fees, phantom maintenance agreements. It's sophisticated. Whoever designed this knew exactly what they were doing. Arthur's jaw tightened. Simon had known exactly what he was doing. For 7 years, while Arthur built the company, Simon had been quietly dismantling it from within. The connection to Titan Holdings emerged 2 days later. Marcus Reeve, Titan's CEO, wasn't just a business rival. He was Simon's college roommate. Old photographs surfaced, the two of them at fraternity parties, graduation, a fishing trip in Colorado. Best friends for 20 years. They planned this together, Richardson explained, laying out email records recovered from Simon's personal laptop. The idea was elegant. Simon bankrupts you with the fraudulent liability clause. You're facing criminal charges for embezzlement. Titan swoops in, acquires Penhaligon technologies for pennies on the dollar in the chaos. Then, conveniently, they discover the money was hidden all along, clearing the company's name but keeping control. "And I'd be in prison," Arthur said quietly. "Yes." The board meeting that followed was brutal. Arthur looked around the conference table at faces he'd trusted for years and saw them differently now. 3 board members had approved the suspicious transactions Simon had orchestrated. Approved them without question, without due diligence, because Simon had made it worth their while. "How many of you were lying to me?" Arthur asked, his voice dangerously calm. The room was silent. Then one board member, a woman named Patricia Chen who'd been with the company since the beginning, spoke up. "I didn't know, Arthur. I swear to you I didn't know." "But you didn't look," Arthur said. "None of you looked." Despite everything, the media circus, the threats, the loss of her job and shelter, Hope showed up to help. She sat in a borrowed office, Arthur's legal team surrounding her, and recalled documents with perfect clarity. 3 months ago, she said, eyes closed in concentration, I was cleaning conference room B on the 42nd floor. There was a contract on the table. Sterling Logistics Consulting. The invoice format was wrong. The tax ID number had too many digits. The lawyers exchanged glances. "You remember a tax ID number from 3 months ago?" Hope opened her eyes. "I remember all of them." And she did. Her photographic memory cataloged every document she'd glimpsed over the years, every number, every clause. Details that would have been meaningless to anyone else became evidence in her mind. But while they built their case, Simon was building his own narrative. Former CFO claims billionaire's paranoia after mother's death led to false accusations, read the Wall Street Journal headline. The article quoted Simon extensively. "I tried to save the company Arthur was destroying through grief and poor judgment. This homeless woman appeared at the right moment to tell him what he wanted to hear. It's tragic, really. Public opinion fractured. Social media exploded with hot takes. Some called Hope a hero. Others called her a con artist who'd manipulated a vulnerable man. Arthur was either a victim or a paranoid fool who'd turned on his loyal friend. Then the real attack came. Child Protective Services showed up at Marcus and Lily's foster home with an anonymous report claiming Hope was mentally unstable, associating with known criminals, and unfit for guardianship responsibilities. The foster mother called Hope in tears. "They're saying they might have to remove the children from my care if you continue as their guardian," she said. "Hope, I'm so sorry, but I can't lose my license." Hope's world tilted. "They're taking my siblings?" Arthur's response was immediate. He hired the best family law attorney in New York, brought in a child psychologist to evaluate Hope's fitness, and personally vouched for her character in a written statement to CPS. "They're not trying to protect those children," Arthur told his legal team, his voice shaking with fury. "They're trying to destroy her by taking what she fought to protect. Everything she sacrificed, her education, her future, she did it for them. And now they're using that love as a weapon." For days, it felt like they were losing. Simon's narrative was slicker, more polished. He had PR firms and crisis consultants. Hope had nothing but the truth, and truth was starting to feel like a fragile shield. Then everything changed. A junior analyst at Titan Holdings, a young man named David Chen who'd grown up poor in Queens, walked into the FBI field office with a flash drive. His hands shook as he handed it over. "I couldn't live with it anymore," he told the agents. "These are internal emails between Marcus Reeve and Simon Vane. They go back 2 years. They planned everything." The emails were damning. Detailed discussions of how to position Arthur for the fall. How to maximize acquisition value post-bankruptcy. How to neutralize potential whistleblowers. They'd even discussed what to do if someone noticed the flawed liability clause, never imagining it would be a cleaning woman with a law degree she never finished. When Arthur saw the emails, he felt something cold settle in his chest. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen trust, corrupted systems, weaponized friendship, and tried to punish the one person brave enough to tell the truth. But now they had proof. And proof Arthur was learning could cut both ways. The press conference was held in Penhaligon Technology's main auditorium, every seat filled with reporters whose cameras flashed like lightning. Arthur stood at the podium, his voice steady as he outlined the charges being filed against Simon Vane and Marcus Reeve. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, attempted extortion. Then he did something his PR team had advised against. He gestured to the side of the stage where Hope sat, looking small and terrified in borrowed business clothes. "This is Hope Miller," Arthur said. "The person whose integrity saved this company. She had everything to lose and nothing to gain. And she spoke up anyway." The questions came like bullets. Hope stepped outside the building afterward, Arthur's security flanking her, and was immediately swarmed. Microphones thrust into her face. Cameras pressed close enough to touch. Voices shouting over each other. "Ms. Miller, are you qualified to give legal advice? Did you expect a financial reward for this? Some people are saying you're manipulating a grieving billionaire. What's your response? How does a homeless woman afford a lawyer?" Hope froze, overwhelmed. She hadn't prepared for this. Hadn't prepared for the way they said homeless like an accusation, like proof she was lying. A reporter from Fox News pushed to the front. "Ms. Miller, you dropped out of law school 5 years ago. Why should anyone believe your interpretation of a complex legal document?" The words hit like a slap. Hope opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She was drowning in noise and judgment and cameras that wouldn't stop flashing. Then something inside her snapped. "I didn't need a law degree to recognize wrong," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I needed a conscience. And I couldn't afford to lose that. It's all I have left." The reporters went silent for a heartbeat. I'm homeless because I chose to take care of my dying brother instead of finishing school, Hope continued, her voice shaking but growing stronger. I work cleaning offices because that's the only job that would hire me. And yes, I saw that document because I was cleaning Mr. Penhaligon's office. But I also saw it because I spent 5 years studying corporate law, and another 5 years unable to stop seeing patterns everywhere I looked. She took a breath. You want to know if I'm qualified? Ask the forensic accountants who verified every single thing I said. Ask the FBI agents who found the emails confirming the conspiracy. Ask Mr. Penhaligon if I saved his company or not. The clip went viral within hours. #HopeMiller trended on Twitter. The internet divided instantly, some calling her a hero, a voice for the overlooked, proof that wisdom didn't require wealth. Others called her manipulative, opportunistic, a homeless woman playing victim to extract money from a grieving billionaire. The cable news cycle picked it apart endlessly. Meanwhile, Simon's defense team launched their strategy. In carefully worded statements, they painted Hope as delusional, Arthur as mentally compromised by grief, and the document as standard legal language tragically misunderstood by amateurs. Mr. Penhaligon was not in his right mind, Simon's lawyer told CNN. He'd just lost his mother. He was vulnerable. And this woman, however well-intentioned, simply didn't understand what she was reading. Hope sat in the small apartment Arthur's team had secured for her. Temporary housing, they called it, and watched herself being dissected on television. Legal experts debated whether a law school dropout could accurately interpret corporate documents. Pundits questioned her motives. One commentator suggested she deliberately positioned herself to be in that office at that exact moment. Maybe they're right, Hope whispered to the empty room, her reflection staring back from the dark TV screen. Maybe I don't belong in their world. A knock at the door startled her. Arthur stood in the hallway, looking as exhausted as she felt. May I come in? Hope nodded, too tired to refuse. Arthur sat across from her, silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, My mother belonged to their world even less than you do. She was a cook. She had a 10th grade education. She cleaned other people's messes her entire life. His voice cracked slightly. But she taught me something those cable news experts will never understand. The world doesn't decide your worth. Your actions do. Hope's eyes burned. Your mother had you to prove her worth. I have nothing. You have the truth, Arthur said. And you refuse to abandon it even when abandoning it would have been easier. Safer. Smarter by most people's logic. He leaned forward. Do you know how rare that is? Before Hope could answer, another knock came. She opened the door to find Marcus and Lily standing there with their foster mother. The CPS investigation had been dropped. Arthur's lawyers had demolished the anonymous complaint in 48 hours. Marcus, 14 now and so much taller than Hope remembered, wrapped his arms around her. You told the truth, he said fiercely. That's what you always taught us. Even when it's hard. Lily, 12 and trying not to cry, added, You're the bravest person I know. Hope held them both, her heart breaking and mending simultaneously. This was why she'd spoken. Not for recognition or reward. For them. So they'd grow up knowing that truth mattered, that integrity couldn't be bought or sold, that doing right was worth the cost. When her siblings left, Hope stood at the window, looking out at the city that had chewed her up and spit her out and was now trying to decide if she was hero or villain. I can't control what they say, she said quietly, more to herself than to Arthur. But I can control whether I run. Arthur smiled. Then don't run. Hope thought of everything she'd lost. Her education, her home, her anonymity, her armor of invisibility. She thought of everything she'd gained, her siblings' safety, her own integrity, the knowledge that she'd seen evil and refused to look away. They tried to make her ashamed of having nothing. But she'd rather have nothing and tell the truth than have everything and live a lie. She turned from the window, her jaw set. "I'm not running," Hope said. "Let them come." The federal courthouse on Pearl Street felt like a cathedral of judgment. High ceilings, marble columns, wooden benches worn smooth by decades of witnesses and defendants. Hope sat in the gallery, hands clasped tight in her lap, watching the jury file in. 12 faces that would decide whether truth mattered more than credentials. Simon Vane sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his expression carefully composed. Hurt, betrayed, the loyal friend wrongly accused. Next to him sat Marcus Reeve, equally polished, equally wronged in his presentation. 3 former board members faced lesser charges at a separate table, their lawyers whispering urgently. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. $47 million embezzled over 7 years. Shell companies with false invoices. A fraudulent bankruptcy document designed to frame Arthur Penhaligon for crimes he didn't commit while allowing Titan Holdings to acquire his company at a fraction of its value. Simon's defense attorney was sharp, calculated. Her opening statement painted a different picture entirely. The document in question was a draft, she said, pacing before the jury. An early version that was never meant to be signed. My client, Mr. Vane, trusted his junior associates to finalize the language. Any errors were theirs, not his. She paused. And let's be clear, Mr. Penhaligon was in no state to sign anything. He was grief-stricken, mentally compromised. If he had signed, the document wouldn't have been legally valid anyway. So where's the crime? It was elegant. Blame the associates. Claim Arthur was incompetent. Make the whole thing look like a tragic misunderstanding. Then Hope was called to the stand. She walked to the witness box on legs that felt like water, raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth. The prosecution went first, gently guiding her through what she'd seen that night. The succession of liability clause, the appendix of false debts, the Titan Holdings watermark. Hope's voice was steady, precise, as she explained the legal trap Simon had constructed. Then came the cross-examination. Simon's attorney approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ms. Miller, you're currently homeless, is that correct?" "Yes." "You never finished law school?" "No. In fact, you dropped out 5 years ago. 2 semesters short of a degree." "Yes." The attorney's smile widened. "And your current employment before you were fired was cleaning toilets and wiping down conference tables?" Hope's jaw tightened. "I worked for a cleaning agency, yes." "So help me understand," the attorney said, turning to the jury with mock confusion. "You're telling this court that you, a homeless cleaning woman with no law degree, are qualified to interpret complex corporate legal documents that even experienced attorneys might struggle with?" The courtroom was silent. Hope met the attorney's eyes. "I was 2 semesters away from a law degree at NYU with a specialization in corporate fraud. I ranked in the top 5% of my class. I have a photographic memory. And I've spent the last 5 years cleaning offices where those experienced attorneys leave sensitive documents lying around." "But you never graduated," the attorney pressed. "No," Hope said quietly. "I had to choose between finishing school and keeping my brother alive during his leukemia treatment. I chose him." The attorney's expression flickered, the first crack in her composure. "Ms. Miller, isn't it true that Mr. Penhaligon is paying for your housing? Your legal representation, that you stand to benefit significantly from this trial?" "He offered me temporary housing after I became homeless for testifying," Hope said. "And yes, he hired lawyers to protect me after your client's associates threatened my siblings." "So you are being compensated?" "I'm being protected," Hope interrupted, her voice firm. "There's a difference." The prosecution's redirect was brief but devastating. They had Hope recite the exact legal language from memory. Bankruptcy Code Section 1129, subsection A, paragraph 11. The precedent from Miller versus United States. The specific phrasing of fraudulent conveyance clauses. She didn't hesitate, didn't stumble. The words flowed from her with perfect accuracy. Then the prosecution handed her a manila folder. "What's this, Ms. Miller?" "Notes I took over the years," Hope said. "Documents I saw while cleaning. I couldn't stop myself from noticing errors, inconsistencies. I kept records." She opened the folder. Inside were photocopied pages covered in her handwriting. Dates, times, document descriptions. Tax ID numbers from Simon's Shell Company invoices. Contract clauses that didn't match regulatory standards. A catalog of red flags she'd witnessed and documented, never imagining they'd become evidence. "I see things others don't notice," Hope said quietly, "because people like me are trained to be invisible. But invisible doesn't mean blind." Arthur's testimony came next. He admitted his grief had made him vulnerable, accepted responsibility for not being more vigilant. But he made one thing clear. Simon Vane had exploited their friendship, weaponized trust, and nearly succeeded in destroying everything Arthur had built. The digital forensics expert confirmed the watermark, presented the email trails between Simon and Marcus spanning 18 months of meticulous planning. The evidence was overwhelming. When Simon finally took the stand, something shifted. Under pressure from the prosecution, his carefully maintained composure began to crack. He admitted to borrowing funds, claimed he'd always intended to pay them back, insisted Arthur owed him for years of unrecognized work. "I built that company as much as he did," Simon snapped, his bitterness finally showing. "His name on the building, his face in magazines, while I did the actual work. I deserved more than a salary." The courtroom went still. Simon's attorney looked like she wanted to disappear. "So you decided to steal $47 million? The prosecutor asked calmly. "I decided to take what I'd earned," Simon shot back. Then he seemed to realize what he'd just admitted. His face went pale. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Simon Vane, 15 years. Marcus Reeve, 12 years. The board members received lesser sentences in exchange for cooperation. When the verdict was read, Hope didn't feel triumphant. She felt exhausted, relieved, and somewhere beneath it all, sad, because justice didn't undo the damage, didn't restore what had been lost, didn't heal the wounds betrayal left behind. But as she left the courthouse, reporters shouting questions she didn't answer, Hope knew one thing with absolute certainty. She may not have had a law degree on her wall, but she had something else, a photographic memory and a conscience that wouldn't let her look away. And in the end, that had been enough. The media aftermath was swift and decisive. Outlets that had questioned Hope's credibility issued public apologies. The New York Times ran a feature, "The Cleaning Woman Who Saw What Others Missed." CNN called her an unlikely hero for the overlooked. Hope became a symbol, proof that wisdom didn't require wealth, that courage could come from the margins. She hated every minute of it. "I don't want to be a symbol," she told Arthur in his office a week after the verdict. "I just want my life back." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then let me help you get it." He slid a document across the desk. Director of Legal Compliance. 6-figure salary. Full benefits. You've earned it. Hope stared at the contract, at the number that would solve every material problem she'd ever had. Then she pushed it back. "I can't," she said quietly. Arthur's eyebrows rose. "Hope, I need to finish what I started," she said. "Law school. I dropped out to save my brother. He's in remission now. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what I could have been if I just had the chance to finish." Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, genuine, warm. "Then finish." The restructured offer came 2 days later. A full scholarship to complete her JD at NYU, covering tuition and fees. A living stipend generous enough to support Hope and provide for Marcus and Lily's care. A part-time consulting role at Penhaligon Technologies with flexible hours built around her class schedule. No strings attached. No obligations beyond completing her education. Hope read it 3 times, looking for the catch. "There isn't one," Arthur said. "Accept this. If you accept, I want you to help me design something. A program for people with non-traditional backgrounds. Formerly incarcerated, homeless, people who dropped out or never had access in the first place. Train them in legal compliance, ethics, and corporate oversight. People who know what it's like to be overlooked. Who sees things others miss." Hope looked up at him. "On one condition." "Name it." "Real power. Not token positions. Actual authority to question decisions, flag problems, push back against leadership when something's wrong." Arthur extended his hand. "Deal." The changes came quickly after that. Whistleblower protections were expanded to include every employee. Not just executives but contract workers, cleaning staff, security personnel, anyone who saw something that didn't sit right. Quarterly open forums were established where any employee could raise concerns directly to leadership without fear of retaliation. An anonymous reporting system was created with an independent review board composed of people outside the company. Legal literacy training became mandatory. Every employee, from the CEO down to the newest janitor, learned to recognize red flags in contracts, financial statements, corporate communications. The board was reconstructed. Arthur brought in a former public defender who'd spent 20 years representing people the system overlooked. A forensic accountant who'd made her career exposing corporate fraud. A social worker who understood how power dynamics silenced voices. "I want people who remember what it's like to be powerless," Arthur told the shareholders who questioned his choices. "Because they're the ones who'll fight hardest to make sure it doesn't happen here." Hope's guardianship of Marcus and Lily was fully restored. The 3 of them moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Nothing extravagant, but clean, safe, permanent. Hope stood in the empty living room on move-in day and cried, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of stability. When classes started at NYU, Hope walked onto campus feeling both ancient and newborn. She was 30 now, older than most of her classmates, carrying experiences they couldn't imagine. But for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't drowning in panic about money or fear about losing Marcus and Lily. She could just learn. She specialized in ethics law and corporate fraud. Her professors quickly learned not to ask questions they didn't want definitively answered. Meanwhile, Arthur established the Eleanor Penhaligon Fund in his mother's name. It provided full support, tuition, living expenses, childcare, medical costs, for students who had to drop out due to family emergencies or financial hardship. The only requirement, a commitment to return and finish, no matter how long it took. "My mother never got to finish anything," Arthur said at the fund's launch. "She was always taking care of someone else. This is for people like her, so they can take care of themselves too." David Chen, the junior analyst from Titan Holdings who'd leaked the emails, received a job offer from Arthur personally. "Courage should be rewarded," Arthur told him. "Not punished." David accepted, tears in his eyes. Hope's first consulting case was small, a contract review for a local supplier trying to do business with Penhaligon Technologies. She sat in a conference room, reading through the proposed agreement, and her eyes caught on a clause buried on page 16. "This," she said, circling it with her pen. "This is a predatory liquidated damages clause. If you miss a delivery by even 1 day for any reason, whether accident, anything, they can charge you the full value of the shipment. You'd be bankrupt after 1 mistake." The supplier's owner stared at her. I didn't see that." "Most people don't," Hope said gently. "That's why it's buried there." The supplier left grateful, the contract renegotiated fairly. Hope sat back in her chair and smiled to herself. Just paying attention. That's all she'd ever done. But sometimes paying attention was everything. Justice, Hope was learning, wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure the next person with nothing but truth on their side didn't stand alone. It was about building systems where speaking up didn't cost you everything. And slowly, carefully, that's exactly what they were building. 2 years later, Hope Miller walked across the stage at NYU's commencement ceremony in a borrowed cap and gown, her hands trembling as she accepted her law degree. The auditorium erupted in applause. Louder than for anyone else, she noticed with embarrassment. But when she looked into the crowd, she understood why. Arthur Penhaligon sat in the third row, beaming like a proud father. Next to him, Marcus, 16 now, healthy, his leukemia in full remission, cheered loudly. Lily, 14 and already talking about following Hope to law school, waved a homemade sign that read, "My sister the lawyer." Hope's throat tightened. This moment had seemed impossible 5 years ago. Hell, it had seemed impossible 5 months ago. After the ceremony, the dean approached her. "Ms. Miller, we'd like you to say a few words. If you're comfortable." Hope wasn't comfortable. But she'd learned that the most important words were often spoken from discomfort. She stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of graduates. Most of them younger, none of them carrying quite the same weight of experience. "I used to think I'd lost my chance," Hope began, her voice steady. "That dropping out meant I'd failed. That life had happened to me, and I just have to accept it." She paused. "But I learned something these past 2 years. Education isn't just what happens in classrooms. It's what happens when you refuse to stop seeing, even when the world tells you you're not qualified to look." She told them about cleaning offices at night, about documents left carelessly on tables, about training herself to notice what others overlooked. "Some of you will go to prestigious firms. Some will clerk for judges. Some will change the law." She met their eyes. "But all of you, every single one, will have opportunities to speak up when something's wrong. Don't wait until you feel qualified. Don't wait until it's safe. Because by then it might be too late." The applause was thunderous. The job offers came within days. 3 major Manhattan firms, all offering 6-figure starting salaries. Hope turned them all down and accepted Arthur's offer. Director of Legal Ethics and Compliance at Penhaligon Technologies. "One condition," she told him. Arthur smiled. "I'd be disappointed if there wasn't. I maintain full autonomy to challenge any decision made by this company, including yours. If I see something wrong, I say something, no matter who it embarrass or inconveniences." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Arthur said. Hope's first initiative was the Second Chance Legal Corps. She personally hired 5 people, all formerly homeless, all with interrupted educations, all with sharp minds that had been overlooked by a system that valued credentials over capability. She trained them in legal research, compliance monitoring, forensic document analysis. "We see what others miss," she told them on their first day, "because we've lived in the margins. That's not a weakness. That's our superpower." 3 months later, Hope was conducting new hire orientation when a young man approached her nervously afterward. He wore a janitor's uniform, his hands rough from work. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I noticed something in a contract I was cleaning near last week. In conference room 12. It seemed wrong, but I didn't know if I should say anything. I'm just—" "Stop," Hope said gently. She pulled out a chair. "Sit down. Tell me everything. And don't apologize for noticing. That's exactly what we need here." The young man's eyes widened. Then he sat, and he told her about a vendor agreement with suspicious liability language. Hope listened, took notes, and by the end of the day had flagged a contract that would have cost the company millions. The janitor's name was added to the compliance team's acknowledgments. He received a bonus. And he never apologized for noticing again. Arthur, meanwhile, had changed too. He no longer worked 80-hour weeks. He'd hired a co-CEO to share the operational burden and spent 2 afternoons a week volunteering at the community kitchen where his mother had worked for 20 years. He told Eleanor's story to everyone who'd listen, about her sacrifices, her wisdom, her quiet strength. "My mother taught me to see people," he told a room full of volunteers. "I forgot that lesson. It almost destroyed me. I won't forget again." When journalists asked Hope for interviews about The Billionaire and the Maid, how one woman's courage changed corporate America, she declined most of them. "I don't need to be famous," she told Arthur. "I need to be useful." But she did make one visit, to Mercy House Shelter, where she'd slept on a narrow bunk for months, studying by flashlight. She donated half her first year's salary to expand their services, to add case management and job training. Ruth, the shelter director, hugged her tightly. "You gave them hope," she whispered. "You gave it to me first," Hope replied. Late one evening, Hope sat at her desk in Penhaligon Technologies, reviewing a complex merger agreement. The office was quiet, the city lights twinkling beyond her window. Her phone buzzed with an email from an address she didn't recognize. "Ms. Miller, I'm a security guard at a pharmaceutical company. I saw something at work that doesn't seem right. Executives destroying documents after hours. After reading about you, I thought, maybe I should say something? But I'm scared. I can't afford to lose this job." Hope's fingers moved across her keyboard without hesitation. "You absolutely should say something. And you won't be alone. Tell me everything. Let's figure this out together." She hit send, then stood and walked to her window. The same skyline Arthur had once watched from his penthouse 60 floors up. The towers, the lights, the endless sprawl of ambition and power. But Hope's view was different. She was on the ground floor by choice, where she could see both the towers and the streets below, where she could see the people others overlooked, the cleaners and guards and workers who kept the machinery running. She could see everything, and she'd make damn sure everyone else started seeing too.
And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it or learned something new, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps support the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop your thoughts or questions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.